the layers palette is very similar to AutoCAD. You have your layers, everything on your layer. You can hide and freeze things individually. Of course, this brings us back to the object properties. If we say by layer, and then try to change a project, I grabbed the wrong object, I'm sorry. If you try to change properties now, of course, they're all grayed out. For instance, right now, if I were to freeze this and say, okay, it turns gray. Okay. Well, it turns gray because generally when you freeze something, it does that to let you know that it's frozen, you can't manipulate it. You notice the little snowflake symbol. If I were to come back out and click on the object, I can't click on the object. Okay? I can click on any of these other objects, but this object is frozen. So I can come up here and unfreeze it, click on it, go to object properties. Again, now down here you see show frozen in gray. You can turn that off, and it will allow you to see that object in the color or material that it normally has, but it will still be frozen. Now notice again that it is grayed out. And again, that's because it's by layer at this point. So if I click on that, I can turn that off, freeze that, say okay, and it still looks the same, but I still cannot manipulate it. It's just a personal preference depending on how you want to do it. Like I say, by default, Max Design defaults to layer, but you can again turn it off or turn it on depending on what you want to do with it. Now I've got two spheres, and this is bringing up the point that I was making earlier in the select by name tool. The spheres are sphere 001 and sphere 002. What might be more appropriate in this case would be to call this one, let's say, left sphere, and this one right sphere. Okay. That's more informative. And this is really important when you're getting hundreds or thousands of objects in a scene. If you're doing a city or a really detailed set piece, you really want to name everything. It also helps you to organize things. One thing we'll talk about in another tutorial is the Xref system. Again, that's similar to AutoCAD's Xref system, where you can create objects in another file and reference them in a main file. Say you have a chair, a table, a china cabinet. All of those files were created as separate files, separate .max files. But then you have a scene file where you want to combine all of those objects together. Well, you can use the Xref, and excuse me, and that will allow you to pull in files. You can modify the original file, but you can't modify the Xref. In other words, once you bring it into this file, all you can do is move it around, maybe scale it, that kind of thing, but you can't do any modeling to it. If you want to do modeling, you go back to it. And this is really good if you're trying to create a library of objects, similar to AutoCAD's blocks. Anyway, so I've named these. You name them over here in this little dialog box. Also, when you create an object, you can name it here under the Create tab or the Modify tab. It doesn't matter. And again, you really should get in the habit of doing that every time you create an object. A little work up front saves a lot of work later on. The next menu or feature that we'll go over is the material editor. Now, obviously, materials can be several tutorials in and of itself, but needless to say, this is where you add the splash to your objects. 3ds Max Design comes with a ton of ArcViz textures that are real world style, usually taken from photographs. They have real world features like refraction and reflection, those kinds of things. And they're really good when you're doing architectural visualization or any kind of visualization for that matter. Again, we'll go over this later, but the easy way to remember the material editor's hotkey is material equals M. And you hit M on the keyboard and it brings up the material editor. Now, by default in 3ds Max 2011 Plus, right now I'm using 2012, you start off with the Slate material editor, which is a node-based editor. For instance, I'll show you. I'll pull out one. These are nodes, okay? Now, in the past, we used the compact editor, which is, just based on slots, and then you manipulate the features down here. The node-based editor allows you to have more features. Let's say you create one texture that you want to use in multiple materials. You just pull out the node noodle. Yes, it is called a noodle. You pull out the node noodle and create a new material for it. Okay. And now you can use one material in multiple, one texture in multiple materials. Again, we'll go over that later in more in depth. And this is the kind of thing that entire books are written on, i.e. material